All right. Hello, folks, and welcome to OCWG meeting number 6. I'll go ahead and share my screen real quick. So yeah, we're working on reviewing the spec, has been something we've been working towards, and some folks have done some implementation on it. So if you're watching this recording and you don't know anything about OCWG, then you can head to our website, canvasprotocol.org, and that has links to all the relevant things. But all the goodness really is in GitHub. There is a Discord where you can chat with people who are working on this stuff, but we encourage you to go to the GitHub discussions. You can find those at github.com/OCWG. And then the spec that we'll be discussing today is at github.com/OCWG/spec. And I'm looking around and I know all of you, and therefore introductions are irrelevant. So we can skip right over that and jump right to the proposed agenda. So definitely want to honor Steve's and Orion's work in putting together a demo for today and let them go first. So that's why they're at the top of this agenda. But I was just, as I was lamenting the fact that I can't automatically break a text box into multiple lines in TL Draw, I did it manually. So feel free to if you want to reorder the agenda, feel free to do that or vote on something that we want to talk about today. I put one thing at the top that I want to talk about right after the demos, but we'll let the folks demo first, and then we'll dig into some of these discussions. We probably won't even have a chance to get through all of this today. There's a lot of progress happening on the spec and some gnarly open problems to work on. So, all right, Orion or Steve? Orion, I'm going to give you the prerogative to go first if you want. Unless you're saying I need like 2 more minutes, in which case Steve can go first. What do you think?
I can do 15 seconds. I'm just trying to add a note which I want to just write down before I forget it. And that's all I
No
need to do.
worries. No worries. That sounds good. This would be the part of the show where the guy with the guitar does like an ad lib and tells a joke, and as the next guy is getting set up. Yeah, if I don't know how much y'all have like dug through the discussions recently, but I spent a bunch of time in there over the last couple of weeks, and there's a lot of good stuff. I actually haven't looked over the weekend to see if there's more stuff since the weekend. Um, but yeah, really appreciate all the stuff going through. And there's still a couple that I have left to respond to, specifically one, Max, where you addressed a few things that I haven't yet responded to on the non-visual nodes stuff. So there was a couple things in there that jumped out to me. So I'll get to that. But it's coming along.
Cool. Gonna enable I guess I can do that as well. But I think you're a host right now though. So
Yeah, I gotta do that every single time, Zoom. All right, it is enabled.
cool.
Take it away, friend.
All right. Are we in?
Yep.
All right, so I haven't got much of a demo. I was hoping to have arrows working and finish up the round trip part of this, but I got really hung up on the Excalibur side of programmatically dealing with arrows specifically. So I'm gonna have to reach out and figure that one out. But uh, I think it's already exciting that we can take a rectangle and have it, in tail draw on the left, Excalibur on the right. And we can take a bit of text. And that's gonna, these kind of bounding boxes are gonna roughly line up, or at
Wow.
least the origin points are gonna line up. Um, so yeah, I'm pretty
Nice. Yeah.
excited about this. Um, we can start messing around. One thing which has so far stumped me on the Excalibur side, uh, which is something very basic, but like if I make a little rectangle over here, right, and this is the origin point in Deal Draw, but if I rotate this shape, Excalibur seems to want to rotate it around the bottom right corner, and
Hmm.
I have no idea why that's happening. I need to go back and look closer at the spec. Uh,
Madness. Can you do the edits on the Excalibur side, or is it just one way right now?
it's one way right this second. I got that working, and then I broke it. You can see that it's gonna deselect every time it updates, which is currently
Got
very
it.
often. So I need to change a bit of behavior there. But they are both reading and writing to the same file.
Man, wish I had a
Yeah.
soundboard to give you clapping sounds. That's awesome. Or send with effects.
It is exciting, and it is. I will say, especially for building out integrations with this spec, I think actually that having environments like this where it can be done in real time are actually going to be really important, right? It's not that we want to prioritize like real time multiplayer, but it's actually that is kind of necessary to debug this. If I had to open a file every time I made a change to see if it worked, that would be a nightmare for development. Whereas here it's just gonna read every 50 milliseconds or whatever it is, or wait for the server that wraps around the file to notify it that it's changed. Um, but yeah, fun stuff. I'm really looking forward to expanding on this now that we have the base.
Steve has a question.
Yes.
Go,
Yeah,
Steve.
your demo is going to be way ahead of mine. But my question is for the real-time stuff, how are you checking what changed? Are you doing it manually, or is there some kind of, how do you know what is being updated?
I I don't currently. And I assume that everything I refresh the entire
Mhm.
canvas whenever anything is changing. And on the
Okay.
Excalibur side, that's just every 50 milliseconds because I don't really know how to do that differently there, but hopefully soon on both sides it'll just be whenever the actual file changes. Um, yeah.
Another thing we
All
were
right.
talking about showing here is basically having like a third panel. So you can imagine
Right.
Excalidraw, TL draw, and having a third panel that actually shows the JSON of the OCWG export.
Yeah.
Uh, so that would,
That's here. I wonder if I can.
oh, pretty print it. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
the format JSON is usually the thing.
Yeah, I can do that, but the problem is what is it?
Command
Format
Shift P
public?
format. Yeah. The second option should do it on that
Okay.
list there. Oh, you have to save it as a JSON file.
Yeah. But well, this won't be live updating, but you can at least let's at least just show you what this looks like. Oh, now it knows. There we go. So it's just
Yeah.
this right now. We have IDs, schema string, XY, and then a properties bag.
Mhm.
Um, and we just have that for text and rectangles right now. And then there's no relationships at all in this particular case.
Very cool.
But yeah, I agree. A third panel for also for kind of live debugging that's gonna stream updates there and keep it formatted.
Yeah.
I think that would be really,
Yeah,
really
I think
helpful.
that's one thing we can probably use the Canvas protocol website for too, of having this a live
Yeah.
deployed web app that people can go play with, and then just have a big button in the top right of like go to the GitHub and fork this yourself if you want, or like load a stack blitz with this exact repo in it if you want to mess with it.
Yeah.
That could be a great way. I think that's one of the things that TLDraw has demonstrated so beautifully as a company is that this problem space lends itself so well to visual explanations of what's happening. And so yeah, be
Yeah,
pretty neat.
what I would love to do for both Teal Draw and Excalibur is something that I've is like be able to do this kind of stuff more easily. So like this is a shape and be able to in Excalibur or in Teal Draw pipe out not just their insides, but like the kind of OCWG version of that. so that people that are
Yes.
working in either of these worlds can quite easily get to like, oh, let me just like, so, you know, it would just be something like, yeah, JSON stringify, you know, you just slap an OCWG function in there somewhere, and then all of a sudden this is not TL draw schema, it's like the mapping to OCWG and gives you something to copy and paste. I think that would be, great.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. The other tool that's related to this that we talked about was potentially having a browser extension that that can sit on top of any individual canvas at least a canvas that exposes its underlying data representation. So the TL draw exposes the entire data representation on the window object. So a browser extension can read the window object and then convert that to OCWG. So you could imagine a browser extension that opens a separate panel and doesn't do any round tripping to another tool, but it's a much simpler tool that just gives you the OCWG inspected version of any individual canvas. And you could easily have like a save to file, save this to disk or export to disk or whatever, or potentially even a load from disk that would load an OCWG file and overwrite the TL draw that you're currently looking at with that OCWG. So another slightly different tool that I think would help a lot with debugging and developing these things. So, Steve, you want to show what you've got so far?
Sure, let me share my screen.
I did make a mistake. I should never make anyone follow Orion on a demo. He should always be last.
Let's see if this works. All right, it says I'm sharing my screen now.
Yep.
And let's see if I can't switch tabs because it's overlapping, but I'm just going to click here again. All right, so when you click on my link, you get this Stack Blitz, which is kind of like a souped up code pen that I've been using. And then you can see I only spent about half an hour on this just to see as a proof of concept, because this is going to be the first step to getting a third column on Orion stuff, is the export and import. And it's just taking a moment to run here. I don't know why. There it is. So the first thing you have to do is make the window larger. I put a warning there. So here we have this output an OCWG format on one side and a drawing tool on the other. So as I click, and I think my computer is really slowed down or something as a result of screen sharing. All right, now it's working. So here I'm just drawing stuff and the clicks aren't very responsive for some reason. Probably because of screen sharing and I'm using Ubuntu, some interaction there. But here is the output, and we can see this is a brush stroke. And one problem I had was I don't really know what a brush stroke should look like with the schemas. And so it's just putting the raw properties in Zwibbler format, and other tools would not know what to do with these. So the next step would be to translate them once I know exactly what they should look like. And it occurs to me that that rotation problem is going to be the first of many problems, because when you have rotate, what does that mean? Is it around the canvas origin? Is it around the shape center? Is it around one of the corners? And that is just something that has to be specified. I have a matrix, and that's what I would be translating to your rotation. Why can't I click? Oh, there it is. Here's a circle, rectangles. I have that clicking problem. But that's essentially it. And the export code from my format, from my tool, is pretty simple, but it's got to be filled in. It's just getting a list of all the nodes, finding out their X, Y coordinates, and getting their raw properties. And over here is going to be a lot of code to translate it into whatever format we decide on, translating it into the schema. And I'm going to be looking at Orion's code, if it's available, to see what that schema should be. And that's all I have.
Go ahead, Orion.
Yeah, just one thing that I wanted to mention here for maybe a future discussion, is something I'd never considered, is the option of actually defining like the origin on the shapes themselves with something like a matrix, or whatever representation we end up using. So I wonder if it would put the onus of doing that translation on the clients to go from, top left corner to center origin points, that kind of thing. I'm not advocating or kind of suggesting that that's a good idea, but it was just something that had never crossed my mind until just now.
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to think about is, does rotation origin need to be like ideally rotation origin would be something we could assume without having to specify it for every object, and then canvases would know what the assumed rotation origin is and would do the translation themselves. I think that's a simpler way to handle it, but maybe I'm missing some of the vagaries there. Max, were you going to talk about rotation origin? Go for it.
Yeah, exactly. The rotation should be defined in the spec. I mean, if we say the rectangle is rotated, what do we mean by that? But the rotation origin doesn't need to be exchanged across rules. That doesn't serve any purpose.
Agreed. Yeah, that seems like I can't think of any edge cases where that's a problem right now. Like my mind immediately went to shapes that are irregular, and like calculating their center point is actually can be somewhat challenging. And then if we go with top left is like, okay, so what is top left? Either like, is it the furthest the largest X value and the smallest Y value, and it's the, go perpendicular from there to that. Is that top left for irregular shapes? So
CSS has solved these problems. They have a similar thing in their transformations. We could probably look at that as a basis.
Good point. I'll list it. I'll put it on our growing list of open problems. Something to go look at. But yeah, you're right. There are other tools that have certainly solved this. The thing is, yeah, we're trying to strike this delicate balance, right, of being between two low level, like all the way down to the level of like an SVG, where there's no notion of rotating an SVG. It's just, it actually changes all of the points in the, well, actually that's not true. Rotation is a thing in SVG as well. So need to think. Adding this to the all right, well, let's jump back over to, I'm going to share my screen. Jump back to this, and we can specify rotation origin. All right, I'm going to push this down. So the main thing that I wanted to talk about from an agenda perspective is, Max, I think this was your suggestion to have multiple schemas per object, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I think we need that in order to support better round tripping.
Yeah, and that was actually what Orion was hoping to demonstrate today, and got close to demonstrating, was arrows in TL draw and Excala draw are slightly different from one another. And so demonstrating the ability to have a sort of base arrow, well, have an arrow, it's like an inheritance tree, kind of, you'd have like an OCWG arrow. and then a TL draw arrow, and a Scala draw arrow, which would both inherit from the OCWG arrow. And so what he was hoping to demonstrate today was, and this will be like an important thing to figure out when round tripping, is you create an arrow in TL draw that has some parameters that Excalidraw doesn't understand, but it can at least display it because TL draw inherits from OCWG arrow. So it can display the things that it understands. Then you edit that arrow in Excalidraw. That adds some properties that TL draw does not understand. And so then how do you represent, and then this was Max's point. You need both of these property bags, the TL draw arrow and the Excalidraw arrow property bag, to fully represent this one arrow, because it's been edited by both canvases. And then the important thing that we've talked about over and over again is each canvas then needs to respect the property bags it does not understand and preserve them when writing the file back out. So.
And unfortunately, you can still run into a bit weird problem. So you have your arrow in Excalidraw, and let's say the label is something really special in Excalidraw. You change it in Excalidraw, so now it has a different label, but TL draw doesn't understand. It puts the label in a very different way. So now whoever sees it with a different label. And in reality, it will not be labeled, but it might be the background texture or whatnot. But it will sort of not be the same. So some properties may semantically contradict each other. And this is, I have no idea how to solve that, honestly.
I'm unsure that is a solvable problem, kind of in a
Agreed. Probably not solvable, and that is probably okay for given the purposes of this particular project, is we know it's not going to be exactly the visual fidelity between the two. There will be visual fidelity and even meaning at times that's lost between the two. I think what it would probably require in that specific case would be the TL draw and Excalidraw, whoever's the author of these two schemas, to kind of talk and say, hey, I mean this with this thing. Is there any way that we can kind of, can we
get it up?
Can we move it up to OCWG arrow would be a good question. And that's another reason why I'm glad that we're versioning these specs. So this could be, in the 1.1 spec, it takes those two parameters from Excalidraw arrow and TL draw arrow, and they agree to use the parent spec. And given that we're using like a hierarchy, I don't know how far we want to go with this, but there could be a case where pushing it all the way into arrow doesn't make sense, but there's like a sort of TL draw plus Excalidraw arrow that then inherits from this one, and these two guys then agree to inherit from this guy. So they could kind of work together on that one, share a property across the two. I don't see any reason why this wouldn't work. It could get pretty complicated, but we probably need to recursively resolve all of the specs to build up the property bag. Cool. And I think that one made sense. That was a really good call out, Max. And we'll hopefully have a demo that kind of demonstrates that working within the next week or so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other stuff on here. I added these things to the list based on the discussions in GitHub. Is there anyone that's like a burning thing that somebody wants to talk about?
What about the multiple underlying representations? What exactly?
That's a good question. I think I meant this. That's a good question. I could talk through some of these if they don't make sense. Oh yeah, I think let's talk about this one real quick. So as we were looking at how to represent, I can't even remember how this came up, but we realized that TLDraw, at least, when it exports its schema, it actually exports the current viewport of the person who does the export. So kind of where they are looking on the canvas. And then the TLDraw guys and Orion has done, in particular, has done some messing with that viewport attribute. Like you can do like different, I think, projections of that viewport. So you can basically modify the camera in some interesting ways. I'm pretty sure that's not supported by probably most canvases in terms of modifying the projection. But if we store viewport, we're able to pass a canvas to someone, and when they open it, it's looking at the thing that we want them to look at, right? That's basically the advantage here. When we talked about it, though, would this be a node or would this be a relation? And the conclusion that Orion and I tentatively came to is neither. This actually is legitimately a third thing. We basically have nodes, which are all visual things on the canvas, are represented as nodes. This is not a visual thing on the canvas. Then we have relations, which basically represent an idea or a conceptual relationship between things that are on the canvas. And this isn't that either.
You could argue it's a kind of node. It is a kind of visual. This is the rectangle the guy exporting it was looking at. Feel free to zoom to the same rectangle if you like, but also zoom out and see still the same rectangle in red if your tool maybe doesn't support it. Just import it as a red rectangle maybe. So this
So I
could fit into the node land.
I've shifted over the last days, like in that direction, and one of the reasons for that is I think a useful way of thinking about the camera when it comes to sync and like its utility is maybe it's more a question of having a reasonably first-class schema for like bounds, right? Basically just defining a rectangle with little else, like not a rectangle with color or anything like that, right? You're just saying, here's the min X and Y, max X and Y, that they're always going to be in the correct order, right? It's just like a very basic axis-aligned bounding box, no rotation or anything like that. Because then you can give that some data that's saying like, hey, like these are the bounds of the current camera view. So if you wanna lock yourself to that as you're syncing or when you open a file, you can do that, but we're not going to treat it as something entirely special. One reason for that is that I think there's a lot of like utility in being able to represent just bounds. And I am thinking here that these would be nodes, even if they are nodes that you might not always want to see. There's a lot of stuff you can do with that, from defining where the camera is to like multiple views of like, here's a region that you should look at for whatever reason, or like, future kind of deep linking stuff, being able to say, hey, open up this canvas file, but open it up at this particular location, where the location is not like a coordinate or something, it's a bounding box.
That's a really good point.
And I guess in our representation, that would be X and Y would be min X and min Y, and then you could either have a width and height or a max X and max Y as properties.
Okay, you're starting to convince me that this could be represented as a node and that that's a reasonable representation. The other thought I had, I don't know how many of you have used 3D modeling software, but in like 3D Studio Max or those kind of different tools, you'll have different camera angles that you're looking at the object on. And very frequently the camera for the different camera angles is actually also visible from the other angles. So the camera is an object in the scene. It just happens to be an object through which you can view the scene at the same time. And that seems like the analog here is that we're basically saying viewports are a type of node. you can have 0 to many different viewports. And then you can represent kind of like the current viewport or whatever when exporting the canvas. And then more advanced tools could do more advanced things with those viewports, like you mentioned. I was thinking about, what was that canvas-based tool for presentations? Prezi? Was that it? Prezi? That basically allowed you to like set different viewports, and they were numbered, and you could jump between them for your presentation. And it had a really nice like animate between viewports. That's kind of a cool idea that you could represent those Prezi viewports with this representation as well.
And you get a unique ID per viewport for free because nodes have an ID.
Right.
Yeah, we inherit all of the other nice stuff, including the bounding box stuff. Orion, I'm not sure that I understood what you meant by making bounds more of a first class thing. Are you actually recommending a change to the way that we represent bounds for the base node type? Or are you okay?
I was saying that it's like informationally it's redundant to have one corner of the bounds, because you X and Y are enforced. So you could use X and Y to be the min X and min Y. Or if you want to be more explicit, you could have the X and Y the same as the min X and min Y, but then have, min X, min Y, max X, max Y in the properties would be the other thing, which would be,
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, then, and we're still in agreement that the default node type is not going to have bounds associated with it. In other words, it's XY only. And then if you want bounds, that would be down to the schema to figure that out. And I think the one use case that I'm actually aware of is the Canopio doesn't have bounds for its text objects. It only has XY locations, and it relies on the horrors of text wrapping that Max addressed earlier to compute its own size for those text objects. And so we could force it to export bounds, but it seems like there are cases like that where you just want to say it's at this XY location. But it is likely that most of the schemas will have bounds information. Okay. Great. On to the next thing, unless somebody has anything else to say there. We've talked a little bit about asset storage with MIME types. I don't have anything more to say there. So I'm gonna bump that down.
I would like to
Yeah, go
ask
for it.
some questions. So
Yeah.
typically if you have such a canvas and you have some external images imported and placed somewhere, this image data will not live in the file. That would be too messy to have a base 64 encoded in the JSON. You could do it, but for larger images, it's just ugly. So you probably will export some kind of archive that has files attached to it. But for shorter text nodes, you have them inline. What about a medium-sized markdown document? So in Obsidian, they have a distinction between notes and documents, I think. So you have like both kinds of things. And we could sort of unify it and say, well, we have blocks making up the canvas, and they have positions, and they're different types. They might contain a rectangle, they might contain a file. The file might be inline, the file might be externally, the file might live on the web, but it's all the same mechanism all the time. And then we even have like fallbacks also defined in the same way. Like, here's this thing, it lives on the web, and as a fallback, we have a node and which we cleverly put in the file right here. So if your internet is not there, you can see something. But if we're not clever, we rendered a different file somewhere else on the web. We can do our local file. So all ways are possible if we kind of make these decisions orthogonal. So we have a node, and the content has a type and a location, which can be inline attached elsewhere. And that would be very flexible.
Yeah, definitely. I think Orion and I talked about this a little bit when we were in Berlin, and I think that we came to basically the same conclusion, that we need the ability to basically I think we talked about it via the URI. The URI could be a data URI, which would allow for inline. And it could also be a local URI where it's pointing to something that's in the same file directory structure. So that way we could zip it up, or it could actually be a URL, right? Because a URI is a superset of URLs, and that could try to grab something from the web. Yes, and then is that similar to what you were recommending, Max?
Yes, exactly. Maybe except for data URIs. I mean, data URIs are fine and they work, but the hackability of data URIs in a JSON file is kind of me. So separating the MIME type and have another block for the content would make it the easiest to just actually hack in the JSON file as an alternative syntax, so to say.
I'm not sure I'm following you about what do you mean by URIs, data URIs or hacky, or
Actually, what you have here is a data URI which doesn't define the MIME type. A very conforming data URI would be data : / image / JPEG, comma, the data.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what makes it a bit unhackable. So editing Markdown in that format where line breaks need to be, I don't know what to make. I mean, it's just very cumbersome.
Got it. But are you just saying it's good that we support a variety of other options? Or are you saying
yeah, I would just say
data?
You could have a URI and you could also have a content which just takes a plain text string. And if the MIME type makes sense to have a plain text content, then maybe there's some precedence of URI or content, what is taken first, but that's about it.
Gotcha, I see.
Just so that inline Markdown is a bit friendlier to the eye and to the editor.
Yeah.
I mean, line breaks in JSON is still not so great.
I actually haven't learned anything there. I'm not aware of what those problems are.
Yeah, maybe just put them in the file and it's fine.
Right. They're okay when you have a computer that's doing the work for you, but if you go in and edit a JSON file, it's very easy to mess it up yourself.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And this is I should have grabbed all of this. This was from a schema that we were roughly calling asset.
Yeah, and then what is the difference between an asset and a text node? Is it not the same?
Yeah, I think they would be different, like you're mentioning, and then it's going to be up to the well, how would they be different? I think they should both be available, and then it's up to the canvas to decide when I'm exporting my text nodes, do I want to use an asset and an inline markdown file, or do I want to use text? And I think this is actually a really interesting design challenge for even tools themselves. Like, I don't know if anyone has used Muse. That particular tool has some weird differences between text blocks and inline text, like documents versus like a single line of text. And then you end up, I mean, what ends up happening is that you end up in this weird space where you were working with a single line of text and you actually want to turn it into a document, and then you hit return. Does that change its type? Like, it's a really interesting UX challenge, but I think we should leave it up to the Canvas author to decide which direction they want to go. And the specific reason, right, is we actually, while the data URI method or the content method on the asset is supported, what this is more importantly allowing you to do is to package up a bunch of files alongside it or point to stuff on the internet.
Okay, but if we have a text node, let's say we have this asset node, and our MIME type is text plain.
Yep.
And then we have content hello world. How is that any different from a text node saying hello world? I mean, it's both inline, it's both saying hello world. Why do we need two ways to represent the same inline content saying hello world?
I mean, that's a good question. So
the location can be different. Yeah. One, like what you have in your other tools, is the location is either inline or external in the file. But we support that switch in the asset here. So the asset can be the same asset doesn't
Okay.
need to be external. Asset is in the end node. So we
Right.
can generalize and say every node can have its content defined inline or referenced in an attached file or external file.
Mhm.
And then it's just unified. And we still can have the distinction between the inline nodes and the externalized markdown files if we want that.
Yeah, this has come up before, and I think it's part of what makes asset handling really important to think carefully about, is that they're not really the same kind of thing, right? Because it's about like where stuff is, not what it is, in the way that
Yeah.
schemas define types of nodes.
But why is it
And in
different? I
that
don't get
sense,
it.
it's like it's not it's not its own kind of shape on the canvas, right? It's, you could have
Why
a
not? Why not? Why can I not import an SVG shape and say it's located in the file? It's a very complicated SVG drawing. I'm locating it in my node here at this XY coordinate,
Sure.
and the
Yeah, yeah.
content is here.
What I mean is that you know, you can have images, SVGs, binary files, PDFs, and so on and so on and so on. And it feels like the type of thing that they are is not the fact that their content is being pulled from somewhere else, but it's like the fact that they're a PDF or an image, right?
Exactly.
And in that sense, asset handling is like ideally something that is, you know, robustly kind of handleable by any shape that wants to point to something outside of the JSON file, right?
Yeah.
It's
And
like,
I think
oh,
it's
like
what Max is, I think
either
what
I'm gonna
Max
have a
is saying,
string,
yeah,
or I'm gonna point to an endpoint that's gonna give me that string, or a local file. Um, there's considerations that we need to make there. But my question with that is, what does that look like in a way that is like uniform across different shapes, right? Like we would ideally, yeah, I don't know, like maybe it's part of the parsing kind of part of the spec of to have some well-defined rules there of, you know, if the properties contains a MIME type, or rather, like if it contains a URI, say, then we're gonna assume that this is pointing to an asset, not try and parse it with like inline data. And so we're gonna look for a different property, like well, I guess the URI, or like we would ignore the some local string, and we're gonna try and load it.
I think
How's
what,
that?
yeah, I think what Max is saying, if I'm understanding it, and I think you're kind of more or less agreeing with it, Orion, is that instead of having an asset schema at all, we instead have schemas for each of the different kinds of things, because it's the schemas are about kinds. And when you have a kind of a thing, the content, if there's content for that thing, that can be loaded either inline, locally, or remotely. And what we would need in the properties, so this would be an example of a text node. Before we had a text node, I think we had the property called text that had the content in it. I just changed that to content. So in this case, we can specify the MIME type of the text, and then the content can be there. If it's inline, then it's right there in the content file or the content field. And if it's not, if content is not present, then it's going to look it up in the URI. Also, the URI could be a data URI if you want, or it could be a URL, could be a local reference. So if we just kind of have this, like, I guess the first thing would be look for content.
I wanna pause you
Yeah,
there, because
go for it.
this kind of gets to part of my question here,
Okay.
is that I don't think we can get to what we want here with just having like a single like content property, because that makes this assumption that that like assets are like one thing, right? Which at and the hard part about that is that it means that we have to have some like universal sense of like, oh well, obviously of every shape having exactly one thing that is the asset part, and then the other properties are like normal, right? For but how do you know that a shape, the one particular property can be also an asset, but all the others are like gonna be in that property bag? Um, does does that make sense as a
Then just reverse
so
it. Look
you
for
say,
URI first.
I think what Orion is hinting at is that multiple properties might require binary external content located elsewhere.
Oh, okay.
And
I
I would
see.
like to add, we need multiple contents anyway in order to have fallback mechanisms. So, so we have like two crossing
Yeah,
points to have
I was
more.
thinking about fallbacks separately, but as an important thing. Okay, so you're basically, so my second proposal is going to be fine. Look to see if there's a URI first, and if there's no URI, then go grab the and this could be grab whatever you need. It doesn't have to be just the content field. It could be many fields, right? And then
I
the
have
expectation would be that the URI would resolve to the same set of fields that this particular schema actually needs. But you go ahead, yeah, Max.
So,
All right.
so what worked great was the web. So you have one resource, you say get, you have some content negotiation, you get the resource, your representation, you understand, and you're happy. So that resource can give you different representations. And now we inline all that stuff. So we need an array of representations, maybe ordered by precedence, or they have different MIME types, or maybe they have the same MIME types but different locations, whatever, but we have a list of content. And every node has one content, like in the web. And if a node for its rendering needs to fetch more digital resources in some specific way, it can do so. We can put that in the property bag and they can resolve 15 URIs if they want to. But by default, one node is one resource, has one content, is a model that worked great for the web
Mm-hmm.
and gives us something to lean against. I mean, I agree with Orion that we could make it more complicated, and there is some reason for that, but then it gets too complicated.
very pro simplicity, where we can
And the
find ways
view,
to make
yeah.
simple and still robust. I mean, yeah, I was just about to kind of hack at an idea for multiple things, but I'll finish this thought anyway. But I want to think about how the more things we can not do at all, like the better. I'm all for that. So let me just kind of flush this. Oops.
Yeah, it looks like, yeah, you were thinking, I got what you're saying.
Right. We'll just, make something up here. So the idea would be the one approach to this would be you'd have this this kind of reserved property, which if we wanted to, if it was important enough for shape for asset handling to be universal, which feels like it might be, then it would be a reserved property on any shape. If they wanted to have something called assets, like they'd have to give it a different name. So it'd be part of like the very basic schema. Or actually, well, okay. I have too many thoughts at the same time here. But the idea here would be that one, if it has assets, it's going to fetch those resources, whether they're local files or something on the web, and then those are going to take priority over the other like properties, right? So if there was a text field and a text asset, like which might be some long essay or something, then it's gonna prioritize the asset, but it's gonna fall back to the local text field, which could be something like effectively a default error message type short string, or it could be like the full content for all we know, right? But we would just pick an order which seems to naturally be prioritizing the remote asset and using the others as a fallback. And then of course you can still get into situations where you maybe don't have, where the fallback is nothing. But this would be one way to go about it, where assets are really just some subset of properties.
Right.
So the assets could also be validated with the same validation as the properties, where you say that everything in the assets has to be a valid property. They have to have the same, type and so on.
Can we maybe generalize this asset idea even further and say we have a node and all of its property and content, lives elsewhere? I mean, I find it hard to imagine we have an open canvas format for exporting a canvas to a file. And then, okay, we make the compromise. Some images are really, really, really large, and there's no point to move them around. They live on the CDN already out there, so we just reference them. But now we generalize it more and more and say, okay, actually, this node property, we didn't externalize it in the file, we put it into reference. Why? Is that really required? Can we not mandate to have it here? And then for some use cases, maybe, no, we have an external node and it changes color depending on the day, and we cannot export that. Okay, so the node lives on the web and we import the complete node. But do we really then need to have one facet of the node is being imported from the web while the other properties from Excalidraw are actually other? I mean, it's...
So
yeah, maybe we need that.
Are you saying that this text could be that any individual property in the properties bag could be either URI or
no, but what Orion said is if we have assets, these assets might also define properties. So for example, the text content might also be one of these externally defined properties loaded from an asset. We have no agreed upon notion what an asset really is.
right?
So that's why it can be different things.
Well, it would have a MIME type, right? Which, as we've already pointed out, is problematic, or whatever that is at the beginning of a URI line. Interesting. So we had one discussion in favor of single resource per node.
One node is one resource, but one resource has different representations. That's how the web defines it. So we have an array of representations, and each representation has a MIME type and a location where the content is, inline, in the local files, a URI or external URI.
Max, could I ask you to write up just a really brief GitHub discussion on that? Because I think I need to chew on that more, and we're coming up to the end of our time. It could just be a few sentences of like, I think specifically what would be helpful to me is seeing one of these. And what do you mean by multiple representations? I think you're describing something that I understand, but it's not clicking right now. So
I'm pretty sure that Max is referring to like how you can
for
even if
fallbacks,
you copy paste something, right? That can have like the JSON, the plain text.
yeah,
like in emails, the plain text fallback for
rich
the
text
HTML.
versus plain text. Yeah. SMTP supports that. Yes. I understand now. Okay. Interesting. I'm struggling to connect with how to implement that with this. But yeah, we're coming to the end of our time, so I want to make sure that we discuss anything else we want to discuss real quick. This definitely bears working out more. I'm glad we talked about it. Let's see. Looking through the rest of the pieces. What I would say is like Steve, Max, Jen, any of you guys, if any of y'all are interested or anyone watching this recording is interested in tackling one of these open problems or like one of these subjects and just starting a discussion in GitHub about that particular topic with either it could be as simple as listing out the problems that they can think of when they're trying to represent this, or it could be actually specifically proposing this is how I would think we might implement it. Either one would be valuable. And and when you do drop a discussion in GitHub, it would be helpful if you dropped a link to it in Discord, for those of us who are hanging out in Discord, because we may not see the GitHub notification in a timely manner and be able to jump in and
You and me, Jess, we should set up a bot for that. That would be.
we
Yeah,
totally should. Yeah,
we should put the onus of that notification happening on us, but we also don't want to do it, so we should set up a bot.
Yep, absolutely. No, that there should be a GitHub channel in the OCWG Discord that has all GitHub happenings that you can join that channel or not if you don't want to see all of those things coming through. We are at our time though, so we looking at the calendar ahead 2 weeks. There will be, I think, July 9th. There probably will be another meeting July 9th. And we'll kind of continue working our way through this stuff. So yeah. Any last minute questions, comments, stuff to work on? Oh, the
That's a
view
good
web app.
meeting.
Yeah.
I would just like to ask Ryan to put the code. I just checked the code on the GitHub and it looks like it's from 2 months ago. So I would like to see that
I'll push
code.
those updates either tonight or tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
I'm not sure. Jen mentioned
Hey, can you hear me?
web app. Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I forked the website, downloaded it, and I'm like trying to load in my Canvas file, and I'm finding out that the web app is pretty hard coded in. You don't load Canvas files, so it's like we just need a reference web app to what you see is what you get, kind of like following the spec. That's all.
Yeah, definitely. No, and when you say you forked the website, I assume you mean the JSON Canvas, Obsidian's JSON Canvas website.
Yeah. I thought, wow, look, I can view the code, and it's like I'm moving stuff around, and it changes it. Can I like upload my own Canvas?
Right. Yeah, that definitely is something that I mean, do we want to write our own Canvas tool though, or do we? I think the more interesting one is having like basically different tabs where you can see this in TLDraw, you can see it in ExcalaDraw, you can see it in Zwibbler, like that.
Yeah,
I think
That's
that's
such a
more
cool idea.
Cool. Okay.
Like iframes?
Yeah, well, even
So-
just tabs up here at the top, it could be iframes, the implementation, but basically you can see the way the canvas is viewed in a variety of canvases as opposed to writing our own Canvas tool.
It's so meta. It's like you get to the website and you instantly understand what the group's working on. It's great.
Exactly. Yes, that is the hope. It should be a live status of where things are for the web. Of course, not every canvas is going to have a web viewer or web representation or be open source and be able to be embedded in the website. But I think the more we can show, yeah, the more we can demonstrate through showing it as opposed to talking about it, I think it'll really help people. So cool. All right, thank y'all so much for tagging along and all the work y'all are doing thinking through this stuff. Yeah, it's cool to see the progress, and we will see where we're at in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye y'all.